call came on a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because I had just pulled a tray of lemon squares out of the oven, my granddaughter Lily's favourite, and I was setting them on the rack to cool when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost didn't answer. I thought it was my neighbour Bev calling to ask if I wanted to join her Tuesday afternoon walking group again, and honestly, I just wasn't in the mood. But I looked down and saw my son's name on the screen. That's the thing about being a mother. You can go years without your children truly needing you in a desperate way, but some part of you never stops watching for that moment. Some part of you is always listening for a change in their voice. And the second I picked up and heard my daughter-in-law's voice instead of my son's, tight, clipped, almost rehearsed, something in my chest went very still. "Vivian, it's Sandra. I need you to stay calm." I set down the oven mitt. "What happened?" "Jeffrey had a cardiac event this morning. He's at Mercy General. They have him stable right now, but he's in the ICU. I don't remember putting on my shoes. I don't remember grabbing my purse or my keys. I remember being in the car, hands on the wheel, and thinking, just drive. Just get there, just get to my son. Jeffrey is 54 years old. He's my only child. I raised him alone after his father passed when Jeffrey was 11, and I worked 2 jobs through most of his teenage years so he could go to a good college. I watched him graduate. I sat in the front row at his wedding. I held his firstborn daughter in the hospital on the coldest night of the year. There is no version of my life that does not have my son in it. I drove 40 minutes in what felt like 4. By the time I pulled into the Mercy General parking structure, my hands had stopped shaking, but only because I had made myself breathe through each stoplight. I told myself, he's stable. They said stable. That means there's time. Just get inside. The ICU waiting area is on the 3rd floor. I knew this because I'd been there twice before. Once when my mother had her stroke, and once 7 years ago when Jeffrey himself had an emergency appendectomy. The elevator felt too slow. I took the stairs. I was halfway down the 3rd floor corridor moving fast when a woman in scrubs stepped out of a doorway directly into my path. She was young, late 30s maybe, with close-cropped natural hair and sharp, attentive eyes. Her name badge said nursing staff, but I didn't catch the name. She looked at me for exactly half a second, and then something shifted in her face. Not alarm, something more deliberate than that. Like a decision being made. She put one hand on my arm, not grabbing, just enough to stop me. "Are you Jeffrey's mother?" she asked, voice low. "Yes, I need to get to him." "I know," she said. "I know. But listen to me very carefully right now." She leaned in slightly. "His wife is in there with a man I've never seen before. They've been talking for the last 20 minutes, and I don't think they know how thin these walls are." She paused. "I think you should hear what they're saying before you walk in." I stared at her. "There's a family consultation room just there." She nodded toward a door 2 feet to our left. "The ventilation runs between rooms. You'll hear clearly. I'll be right outside." Looking back, I understand why another person might have pushed past her. Might have said, "My son is lying in that bed, and I am going in there right now." And I almost did. I almost said exactly that. But something in her voice stopped me. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't dramatic. She was calm in the specific way that people are calm when they know something important and have decided you deserve to know it too. I went into the consultation room. The ventilation grate was low on the wall, half behind a chair. I sat down, and I listened. Sandra's voice came through first. She sounded nothing like the woman who had called me that morning. The tight, controlled tone was gone. She sounded almost relaxed. Easy, like someone who had finally stopped performing and was now just talking. "He's not going to die," she said. Not as reassurance, more like an irritation. like the whole situation had inconvenienced her. They said it was moderate. The other voice was a man's. Low, businesslike. He could have another one. He could, but I'm not counting on that, so we move forward with the conservatorship. The word hit me somewhere behind my sternum. Conservatorship. The cardiologist's notes already show cognitive effects from the event, Sandra said. Short term, but I had Philip review the documentation this morning. He says with the right framing we can file within the week. Impaired judgment following a cardiac event is absolutely a valid basis. And the house? The house is in both our names. That's not an issue. It's the investment accounts and the family trust that I need access to. A pause. That's where she's the problem. She, me. His mother controls the trust outright until she dies or until she's declared incompetent. Sandra's voice was flat, almost bored. She put it together after her husband died. Old money, very protective. Jeffrey can't touch it without her co-signature, and neither can I. So the conservatorship applies to Jeffrey, gets me his power of attorney. And then I challenge the trust terms on the basis that she established it under duress. With the right attorney, it falls apart. That takes time. I have time, Sandra said. What I don't have is Jeffrey changing his mind. He's been asking questions lately. About the finances. About where certain transfers went. Another pause. I need this locked in before he's well enough to ask an attorney himself. I sat in that chair and I did not move. I want to tell you that I fell apart in that moment. I think it might make me sound more human if I said my hands were shaking or my eyes were filling up or I was pressing my knuckles to my mouth to hold back some sound. But the truth is that I went very, very quiet inside. Not numb, not blank, just still. Like every part of me was listening so hard that there was no room left for anything else. My daughter-in-law. The woman I had welcomed into our family. The woman I had defended to friends who raised their eyebrows at the prenuptial she had refused to sign. The woman I had trusted with my son's life, his home, his children. She was standing 12 feet away from me, next to my son's hospital bed, planning to take everything. The man with her. I later found out his name was Peter Holt, a financial consultant who had apparently been helping Sandra move funds quietly for over a year, said something I couldn't make out. Then Sandra laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made my skin go cold. Light, unbothered. She thinks Jeffrey hung the moon, Sandra said. She'll believe whatever he tells her. She always has. I stood up. I walked out of the consultation room, and the nurse was right there, just as she said she would be. Her name, I saw clearly now, was Audra. She looked at my face and didn't say anything for a moment. I need a few things, I said. I need a piece of paper and a pen. And I need you to tell me exactly how long you've been noticing this. Her name was Audra Bell, and she had been on this floor for 11 years. She had noticed Sandra's visitor the week before. He'd come twice, always when Jeffrey was sedated, always with a folder of documents, always leaving before Jeffrey was fully lucid. She had not known what it meant, but she knew it felt wrong. And when she saw me coming down the hall with my face full of nothing but love and urgency, she made a decision. I am grateful for that decision every single day. I did not go into Jeffrey's room that afternoon. I know that sounds impossible. I know you're reading this thinking your son is in the ICU and you didn't go to him. But I need you to understand something. If I had walked into that room, Sandra would have known immediately that something had shifted. She would have seen it in my face. I cannot hide very much from people who know me. And Sandra had been studying me for 16 years. She would have adjusted, closed ranks, moved faster. So instead, I went home. I sat at my kitchen table with the lemon squares still on the rack, and I called my attorney. His name is Franklin Webb, and he has been my attorney for 22 years, since I first set up the family trust after Jeffrey's father died. He is in his late 60s now, semi-retired but sharp as ever. And when I told him what I had heard, there was a silence on the line that told me he understood exactly how serious it was. Don't touch anything, he said. Don't call Jeffrey. Don't confront Sandra. Don't let her know anything has changed. She's filing for conservatorship. She can try. It won't hold. Jeffrey isn't incompetent, and a single cardiac event doesn't establish that, no matter how they try to frame the documentation. He paused. But I want to know about those fund transfers. How long has this been going on? That was the question I didn't have an answer to. Not yet. What I did have was access to the family trust's records, and I had a right to every transaction made on any account that carried my name. I drove to Franklin's office the next morning. We spent 4 hours going through statements. The transfers had started approximately 18 months earlier. Small amounts at first, $2,000 here, $3,500 there, moving from a joint account Sandra and Jeffrey shared into a separate account in Sandra's name alone. Then larger than a wire transfer for $60,000 to an LLC that Franklin traced in under an hour to Peter Holt. $60,000. My son had been working 60-hour weeks for years to build that savings. He thought it was going toward their retirement. I don't think I've ever felt rage quite like that. Not hot rage, cold rage, the kind that settles in your spine and makes every movement deliberate. Franklin filed an emergency motion to freeze any accounts tied to the trust. He contacted a forensic accountant tied to the trust. And then he advised me to do something I had not expected. Go see your son, he said. Today, be completely normal. Be his mother. Let her think nothing has changed. I drove back to Mercy General that afternoon. I want to tell you about walking into that room. Jeffrey was awake, pale, thinner than the last time I'd seen him at Easter, with monitors on his chest and an IV in his arm. He looked at me when I came in, and something in his face broke open a little, the way it used to when he was a boy and had been trying very hard to be brave. Sandra was sitting in the chair by the window. She stood when I came in, and she hugged me, and I hugged her back, and I smiled at her the way I always had. I am not proud of the acting required in that moment. But I thought of my son's money disappearing into an LLC. I thought of the word conservatorship in her voice, flat and businesslike, and I held my smile. I stayed for 2 hours. Jeffrey and I talked about Lily's upcoming school play, about his cardiologist's plan, about summer we'd spent at my sister's lake house when he was 8 years old, and he'd caught his first fish and been so horrified by it that he'd thrown it back immediately and cried a little. We laughed about that. He held my hand. Sandra watched. I didn't look at her any differently than I ever had. Over the next 10 days, I lived 2 lives. In one life, I was Jeffrey's mother, visiting every afternoon, bringing his favorite turkey and Swiss sandwiches from the deli on Marchmont Street, sitting with him while he did his cardiac rehab exercises, watching old westerns with him when he was tired. In that life, everything was ordinary. In the other life, Franklin and I were building a case that would take Sandra apart, piece by piece. The forensic accountant found transfers going back further than we'd initially seen, closer to 2 years. The total, when it was fully accounted for, was just over $240,000. Some had gone to Peter Holt's LLC. Some had gone to a second account we hadn't found at first, opened under Sandra's maiden name at a bank in a different state. And some, this is the part that still makes me set down whatever I'm holding when I think about it. Some had been moved just 3 days after Jeffrey's cardiac event. While he was unconscious, while I was driving to the hospital with my hands on the wheel thinking, just get there, just get to my son. She had moved money while he was unconscious. Jeffrey was discharged on a Thursday morning. I was there. I helped him into the car. Sandra drove, and I sat in the back seat with Lily, who had made her father a get-well card covered in purple marker drawings of horses and hearts. Jeffrey held it the entire drive home. 4 days later, Franklin called Sandra's attorney. I don't know exactly what was said in that conversation. Franklin told me only that it was brief, and that Sandra's attorney went quiet for a long time in the middle of it. What I do know is that by the end of the day, Sandra had been served with papers. She called me that evening. The voice on the phone was not the Sandra I had heard through that ventilation grate. It was not the Sandra I had sat across from at Thanksgiving tables for 16 years either. It was something stripped down and frightened, and I want to be honest with you, part of me felt, briefly, sorry for her. The way you might feel sorry for something cornered, even if you were the one who cornered it. "Vivian," she said, "I think we need to talk. I think we're past that, Sandra." A long pause. "Does Jeffrey know?" "Not the details. Not yet. Please." Her voice dropped. "Please." Her voice dropped. "Please don't let him find out everything. He doesn't need to be dealing with this while he's recovering." I thought about that for a long time before I answered. I thought about my son holding Lily's card in the back seat, about the way he'd looked at me in the hospital, pale and trying to be brave. "What Jeffrey knows or doesn't know is not something you get to manage anymore," I said. "You lost that." The investigation took 4 months. Peter Holt cooperated with authorities in exchange for a reduced charge. He gave them everything, every transfer, every document, every conversation he could remember. He had records. Apparently, he was careful that way, which turned out to be very bad for Sandra. She was charged with financial fraud, wire fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That last charge because some of the transfers had occurred while Jeffrey was demonstrably incapacitated by a medical event. The trial lasted 8 days. I sat in that courtroom every day. I watched the forensic accountant present her findings. I watched Franklin give testimony about the trust documentation. I watched the prosecutor show the jury a timeline of transfers plotted against Jeffrey's medical records, the transfers accelerating in the weeks before his cardiac event, as if Sandra had somehow sensed that time was running short, that her window was closing. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Sandra was sentenced to 28 years. I heard that number and I sat very still in my seat. The woman next to me, a stranger, reached over and squeezed my hand, and I let her because I didn't quite know what to do with my hands just then. 28 years. The drive home from the courthouse is the longest I can remember, not in miles. It was only 20 minutes. But I sat at every red light and thought about the last 2.5 years. About the Tuesday I almost didn't answer my phone because I thought it was Bev calling about the walking group. About a nurse named Audra who made a decision in half a second in a hospital corridor. About a piece of paper and a pen and 4 hours of bank statements. About the lemon squares still on the cooling rack when I got home from Franklin's office the first time. I had thrown them out. I couldn't eat them. I made a new batch that weekend. Lily came over and we ate them at the kitchen table, and she told me about every single horse in her new chapter book, in detail, including their names and their personalities, and which one she would choose if she could have any of them. I listened to all of it. Jeffrey took a long time. That's the part I didn't expect. Or maybe I expected it and just hoped I was wrong. He had believed in his marriage. He had built his adult life inside of it. Finding out what Sandra had done didn't just mean losing a wife. It meant re-understanding years of his own life, going back and looking at choices and conversations and moments of doubt he'd dismissed, and realizing they had meant something he hadn't let himself see. He was angry at first. At Sandra, yes, but also, I think, at himself. And there was a period of about 3 months where he was quiet with me in a way that was different from his usual quiet, and I gave him the space to be that way without pushing. I brought sandwiches. I watched westerns. I let him talk when he wanted to, and sat without talking when he didn't. One evening in early November, he called me from his back porch. I could hear the sound of leaves somewhere behind his voice. Lily was at a sleepover. He said, "Mom, I don't know how you stayed calm through all of it. I think if I had been you, I would have walked straight into that room and said something I couldn't take back. I told him that I had wanted to, I told him that sitting in that consultation room was one of the hardest things I had ever done in my life. And then I told him the truth, which is that I had thought about him, specifically about what he would need from me afterward, and that had been enough to keep me sitting in that chair. He was quiet for a moment. "Audra," he said. "The nurse." "Audra," I agreed. "I'd like to send her something. Flowers or I don't know." "Is that strange?" "I think that's not strange at all." We sent her flowers, a big arrangement, yellow and white, because I'd learned somewhere that yellow meant gratitude, and I wanted her to know. She sent a card back. It said, "I've thought about that afternoon many times. I'm so glad I trusted what I saw." I keep that card in the drawer next to my bed. I think about what would have happened if Audra had kept walking, if she had seen me coming down that hall and decided it wasn't her place. I don't let myself stay in that thought too long, because I know where it leads, and there's nothing useful down that road. But I think about it enough to understand how thin the margin was, how many things had to happen in exactly the right order. Audra had to be paying attention. I had to listen to her. Franklin had to answer his phone. Peter Holt had to keep his records. The forensic accountant had to be thorough. Any one of those things breaks and the story ends differently. Here is what I know about being 71 years old. People will underestimate you. They will see your age and your white hair and your tendency to bring baked goods to things, and they will decide that you are soft or slow or naive or simply not dangerous. Sandra looked at me for 16 years and saw a woman she could manage. She believed that because she wanted to believe it, because it was convenient, she wasn't entirely wrong about me. I'm soft in some ways. I do believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I did, for a long time, extend that to Sandra. But there is a particular thing that happens when someone threatens your child. It doesn't matter how old your child is. It doesn't matter that Jeffrey is 54 years old and taller than me by 8 inches and has been making his own decisions for 30 years. He is still my son. And something in me that has nothing to do with age or softness or white hair came very awake in that consultation room. I don't think of it as revenge. I want to be clear about that. I didn't go to Franklin's office because I wanted to destroy Sandra. I went because my son's life, his financial security, his recovery, his ability to trust his own judgment again was being taken from him. And I was the one person in a position to stop it. That's what I did. Lily is 9 now. She's graduated from chapter books to full novels, and she still comes over for lemon squares every couple of weeks. And sometimes Jeffrey comes too, and the three of us sit at the kitchen table, and it feels ordinary, in the best possible way. The word ordinary used to sound small to me. Now it sounds like exactly enough. Jeffrey is doing well. His cardiologist is pleased. He's careful about what he eats, and he has taken up walking in the evenings, and sometimes he calls me from his walk just to talk, and I sit in my kitchen and listen to the sound of his footsteps on the pavement, and I think, yes, this is what we were protecting, this exact thing. I am 71 years old. I have outlived my husband, both of my parents, and one very carefully laid plan to take everything my family built. Some days that feels like a lot. Most days it just feels like being a mother. I've thought a lot about why things unfolded the way they did. Not in a mystical sense. I'm not someone who believes the universe arranges itself around our pain. But I do believe that the choices people make consistently over time tend to produce the life they deserve. Sandra made choices. So did I. And the distance between where she ended up and where I ended up is exactly the distance between those choices. She chose to see me as someone manageable, someone soft, someone who would accept whatever version of events she handed me because I trusted the people I loved. And she wasn't entirely wrong. I had trusted her. For 16 years, I had given her the benefit of every doubt I had. That's not stupidity. That's what you do when someone becomes family. You extend the best of yourself toward them, and you hope they'll do the same. What Sandra miscalculated is that trust and awareness are not the same thing. I trusted her, yes, but I was also paying attention. I had been paying attention for 16 years, and when Audra stopped me in that hallway and I heard what came through that ventilation grate, every quiet thing I had noticed over the years, the evasiveness about finances, the way Jeffrey sometimes looked confused when certain accounts were mentioned, the too smooth explanations, all of it landed at once. The truth doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives like that, like something finally clicking into place. What I want people to understand is that staying in that consultation room was not passive. It was the hardest act of intelligence I have ever performed. Every instinct I had told me to walk through that door and confront what was happening. That instinct came from love, and love is real. But love alone would have cost my son everything. What saved him was the decision to be still long enough to think, to let my mind do what my heart couldn't do in that moment. That's the thing about wisdom. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like wisdom when you're sitting in a chair with your hand over your mouth, trying not to make a sound. It just feels like endurance. You only recognize it later, when you see what would have happened if you had done the other thing. Jeffrey is rebuilding. That takes time, and I respect the time it takes. Betrayal from someone you built a life with doesn't heal on a schedule, and I've learned not to rush him. What I can do is show up. Sandwiches. Old westerns. Phone calls from a back porch in November. The ordinary things that hold people together when the larger structures have broken down. Audra sent a card that said she was glad she trusted what she saw. I think about that often. She didn't know me. She had no obligation. She simply saw something, weighed it, and made a decision in about half a second. That kind of moral clarity, seeing clearly, acting honestly, even when it isn't required, is rarer than we admit. And it changed everything. The three of us, Audra's instinct, Franklin's knowledge, my willingness to be still, had to work together. None of it alone would have been enough. That's the part I keep coming back to. You can be the most loving mother in the world and still lose if you don't also think clearly. You can be the smartest person in the room and still lose if you don't have the courage to act. Character isn't one thing. It's all of it, working together at the exact moment it's needed. I am 71 years old. I have lemon squares in the oven, and my granddaughter is coming over this afternoon. That is what we protected. All of it was for exactly this.